A note before this one begins. If the kind of case I tell here is one you'd want more of, not one but 10, each told in full in a voice made for the dark, there's a collection called What the Mountain Keeps. 10 files from 10 counties, 5 states, 1893 to 1955. Every one of them walked up into what looked like easy ground, and every one was signed off by the law with the wrong word. 10 hours to sit within the dark, start to finish. The link is in the description and pinned at the top of the comments. Now then, there's a road in eastern Kentucky that forks in a place a road has no business forking. Both sides look the same. Both cut back into the ridge. If you take the wrong one and don't know it right away, you can walk a good hour before it stops being a road at all. The one you don't want is called the Gaunt Fork. I want you to remember that name. It matters later, and the man who lived at the end of it. The one the story is about. He was worse than anything a movie has ever put on a screen. He wasn't a monster from a legend. He wasn't a creature dragged out of some tall tale. He was a man with a name and a birth year, and a mother buried in a Baptist churchyard down the road. That's what makes it worse. Before we start, though, do me a favor. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. Leave it in the comments. Some hollow, some flat plain, some city where the streets meet at right angles and nothing surprises you. I want to know how far up into what country this story reaches. The county I'm going to talk about isn't the one you'd think. It sits between the head of the Cumberland and the West Virginia line. In the 1880s, they cut 2 roads through it to reach the timber. One went south along the water. One went north up over the ridge. That's the one people called the county road. That's the one on the maps. The other one, the one that broke off at 3 miles past the last farm on the left side going up. That one was never on any map I ever saw. It ran maybe 5 miles up a hollow the county called Sorewood Bench. It was passable by wagon in the summer if you were careful, and it went to a house. That's what I want you to picture first. Not a horror, not a shape in the trees. A house. A small, mean house, built into the side of the hill, half dug into the earth, roofed with slate the man had cut himself. Its windows facing the direction the road came from, its door on the uphill side. The man who lived in it was named Rundle. He was 52 years old in October of 1927, born in the county, never left it. His mother was a Rundle. His father was a Rundle. His 2 grandfathers were near enough the same man twice over. The Rundles had been marrying inside the hollow for the better part of 100 years. And by the time he came along, there were only 2 of them left in the county who used the name. He was tall for the region, 6 foot exactly, thin as a fence post, face long, hair the color of iron, hands so large they didn't fit his wrists. He wore the same brown wool coat for 19 years straight, according to a man who saw him twice at 10 years' distance and recognized the coat before the man. He came down out of Sorewood Bench about once a year. Once a year to a store at the head of the county road, where he traded pelts and honey for salt, coffee, black powder, and matches. He did not speak. He wrote what he needed on a slip of paper and handed it across the counter and paid in coin. The storekeeper knew his name from the coin. He had asked once in the year 1912, and Rundle had written it out for him, and after that it was on a paper card the storekeeper kept in a drawer in case he ever had to explain to anybody who the tall man was. He never did have to explain. Not to anybody who came asking with authority, because nobody ever came asking. Which is where Delford Cleve enters this story. Delford Cleve was a timber cruiser. He was 41, from Louisville. Married with no children of his own, and he had been working for a lumber company out of Cincinnati for the better part of a decade. His job, if you don't know the term, was to walk stands of timber and estimate the board feet in them, so the company could decide what to buy and what to leave alone. He carried a compass, a Biltmore stick, a small pocket ledger, and a rifle he had never once fired at anything living. In the second week of October 1927, he was sent to Sorewood Bench. The lumber company had bought cutting rights on a ridge above it and wanted an estimate before they moved the mill camp in. Cleve took the train down to the town, at the head of the county road, on a Sunday evening. He took a room in a boarding house run by a widow named Verley Corass. He ate a supper of ham and cornbread in a room with a single oil lamp, and he asked Mrs. Corass, over the second cup of coffee, about the road up to Sorewood Bench. She stopped what she was doing, held the coffee pot in one hand, looked at him for a moment, as if trying to figure out whether he was serious. Then she said, and this was later remembered exactly because she wrote it down herself in a letter she sent to the sheriff the following week. She said, "There's two ways up that ridge, mister. The road goes on up over. The fork breaks off on your left. 3 miles past the last house you'll see. Don't take the fork." Cleve, being a man from a city, and being a man who had been in a lot of country, laughed at her, not meanly, just the way a city man laughs at a warning that doesn't fit his idea of the world. He said, "Ma'am, I've been in the woods since I was old enough to walk. I appreciate it, but the fork is likely the shorter way, and if the company's paying by the day, I'll take the fork." She didn't say anything back. She just poured his coffee. And in the morning when he came down for breakfast at 4, she wasn't in the kitchen. She had a young woman of about 20 who cooked for her, and the young woman handed him a package of biscuits wrapped in newspaper, and told him Mrs. Corass had gone to sit up with her sister, who was ill. The young woman also told him, without being asked, "Take the county road, sir, all the way up. Don't take the fork." Cleve thanked her, put the biscuits in his pack, walked out to the stable, saddled the mare the company had wired ahead for him, and rode up the county road at first light on the second Monday in October 1927. He was seen by 3 people between the boarding house and the last farm. All 3 of them said the same thing later. He was not in a hurry. He was studying his compass. He was riding into the hollow like a man who thought he knew what was in it. The last farm on the county road belonged to a man named Osrow Whipkey. Osrow was 71 years old that October. He had been born in that farmhouse in 1856 and would die in it in 1933. He was sitting on his porch when Cleve rode past, and he raised a hand and Cleve raised one back. Osrow Whipkey watched him ride on. He watched Cleve reach the place where the road bent left up along the shoulder of the ridge, and he watched Cleve stop. Cleve stopped his horse. He looked at his compass. He looked at the county road going up. He looked at the fork breaking off to the left, half hidden by a stand of poplar, and then he took the fork. Osrow Whipkey watched him take it, and Osrow Whipkey, who had lived on that road for 7 decades, did not run out and call him back. He did not shout. He did not so much as stand up from his porch chair. He would tell the sheriff later. When the sheriff finally came around asking, "I figured if a man is bound to take that fork, then a man is bound to take that fork." Wasn't for me to change his mind. That is the last confirmed sight of Delford Cleve. Osrow Whipkey on his porch, watching him ride into a stand of poplar on the left side of a road that did not exist on any map. The lumber company expected a wire from Cleve by Wednesday. They didn't get one. On Thursday, they wired the boarding house. Mrs. Corass walked to the store and had the storekeeper's boy walk 2 miles down the road to the county telegraph and send back the answer they didn't want. The gentleman had checked out on Monday morning. He had not returned. By Friday, The company had wired the sheriff. Sheriff Alger Muner was 53 years old. He had been in the office for 14 years. He was a heavy man, not tall, with a face that had settled into the shape of not being surprised by very much. He read the wire twice. Then he sat at his desk for a long minute and did nothing, because he remembered a peddler. His name, if you'd asked Muner to write it out, was Bascom Whipkey, no relation to Osro. Whipkey was a common name in that county. Bascom had been an itinerant peddler, coming through with a wagon of tinware and cloth about twice a year, and he had ridden up the county road, the Torwood Bench, in the summer of 1908, and had not come back. His wagon had been found empty at the head of the fork. His mule had wandered down on its own 2 weeks later, half-starved and missing a shoe. Muner had been a deputy then. He had ridden up with the old sheriff. They had walked the fork about half a mile. Then the old sheriff had stopped and looked at the trees and said, "Bascom Whipkey got himself lost. That's what we're going to write, and you and me are going to go home." The old sheriff had died in 1913. Muner had inherited the office and the drawer of open cases. Bascom Whipkey was in that drawer. So was a preacher named Osius Van, an itinerant who had ridden through in the summer of 1919 on the way to a camp meeting the next county over. Van had asked the storekeeper for the shortest way and had been sent. The storekeeper had insisted. The storekeeper always insisted on the county road. Van had not come back either. His horse had been found tied at the bottom of the fork 3 days later. No one had gone up. Now Muner sat with the wire in his hand about a Louisville timber cruiser named Delford Cleve. He knew where Cleve was. He had known for 18 years in some part of his brain he didn't like to open. He rode out to Sorwood Bench on the Saturday. He took one deputy, a man named Rafe Coldiron. Coldiron was 24, new to the office, and he had grown up on a farm at the mouth of a different hollow 10 miles east. He had heard at some point in his life about the Gaunt Fork. Everyone in that county had heard about it. Nobody could ever tell you exactly what they'd heard. They rode past Osro Whipkey's farm at mid-morning. Osro was on the porch, same as before. Muner reined up in the dooryard and asked him if he had seen the Louisville man. Osro said, "Rode past Monday, took the fork." Muner said, "You watched him take it?" Osro said, "I did." Muner said, "And you didn't call out to him?" Osro looked at him, not with shame, not without shame either. He said, "Sheriff, there's a way of things up here. I don't reckon I'll teach it to you at 71. And I don't reckon you'll teach it to me. That man took the fork on his own compass. That's what I'll say if anybody makes me swear." Muner tipped his hat, rode on. They came to the fork at just past noon. The mare was there. Cleve's horse was tied to a rail at the bottom of the fork, a rail that neither Muner nor Coldiron could remember having ever been built. A single length of poplar notched into 2 forks driven into the ground. It looked new. It looked as if someone had put it there recently for the express purpose of taking horses off travelers. The mare had not been fed. Her water bucket was empty. She had drunk at some point from a puddle at the foot of a rock. She had not been beaten. She had not been ridden further up. Somebody had simply taken her up to the rail, tied her, and left her. Coldiron said, in a voice that was already smaller than the voice he had come out with, "Sheriff, somebody wanted us to find the horse." Muner looked at him. He said, "Somebody wanted us to know the man went up on foot." Coldiron did not answer that. They untied the mare, and Coldiron led her back down about 100 yards to a place where she could reach grass. Then they came back to the fork, and Muner stood at the mouth of it for a long time and looked up. The fork was narrow, overgrown along the shoulders. But under the overgrowth, the road was firm, packed dirt over gravel, over what looked like older stones laid down maybe 70 years back. Somebody had built this road once. Somebody had kept it up. And somebody was still walking it, because in the mud at the mouth of it, Muner found one boot print, one facing down toward the county road, as if a man had come to the mouth of the fork and stood there, and then turned around and walked back up the way he had come. Calderon saw it, too. He said, "That ain't Cleves." Muner said, "No, son, it ain't." They followed the fork on foot. Muner told Calderon to stay behind him 10 paces. The road climbed, not steeply. That was the thing that unsettled Muner first. The road wasn't a hard climb, wasn't a bad road, wasn't the kind of thing a city man would think twice about taking. It was easier than the county road. If you took it, you'd think for a good long while that you had made the right choice. They walked for maybe a mile. The trees closed in. At about the mile mark, Muner saw the first thing that shouldn't have been there. A wagon wheel, just the wheel. Iron rim, oak spokes, hub the size of a man's fist, leaning against a beech tree 10 feet off the road. No wagon, no axle, no debris. Just the wheel, placed carefully as if it had been set aside for a reason. Calderon said, "That's Bascom Whipkey's wheel." Muner said, "You don't know that." Calderon said, "Sheriff, nobody drives a wagon on this road. That's a wagon wheel from a peddler's wagon, and it sat there against that tree like somebody wanted it seen." Muner did not answer him, but he thought, and he never wrote this down, but he told it to his wife 20 years later on a night when he could not sleep. He thought, whoever put that wheel there put it there to be seen by a lawman, not by a lost traveler. By a lawman, as if to say, "I know you. I know why you're here, and I want you to know I remember him." They walked on. At a mile and a half, Muner saw the second thing. A boot. Left foot, adult size 10, well worn, laces still in it. Placed upright on a stump beside the road. Calderon did not identify this one out loud. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Muner. Muner said quietly, "Keep walking." At a mile and 3/4, the smell began. I want to be careful with this part. I'm not going to describe it. You know the smell. Anyone who has spent time in country, where large animals live, and sometimes die knows the smell. It is a smell that means something has happened some time ago, and something has been fed. It was not the smell of a fresh thing. It was the smell of an old thing that had been added to overtime in the same place for a long time. Calderon said, "Sheriff, I don't want to be here." Muner said, "I know." Calderon said, "I want to go back." Muner said, "Then go back to the horses. Wait at the fork. Don't come up." "No." Calderon did not go back. He fell in behind Muner 10 paces, and they kept walking. At just over 2 miles, the road bent hard to the right around a hump of rock and opened onto a bench of level ground. A little grassy meadow, maybe an acre, tucked into the side of the ridge. A spring at the far end of it. A garden, a small, careful garden, running along the near side. Corn stubble, a patch of squash, a dozen apple trees, old ones, hunched with the weight of unpicked fruit. And at the back of the bench, dug into the hill, was the house. I want to pause here because before I take you inside that house, I owe you something. A breath here before what comes next. If this is the kind of case you'd want to sit with in the dark, not just hear it once, but keep it. There's a collection I put together with the people at Forbidden Unresolved Stories. What the Mountain Keeps. 10 complete cases, 8 hours, 62 years of records nobody wanted to finish. Each one placed, dated, and signed off with a tidy word that never once fit what happened. The link is in the description below and pinned at the top of the comments. And while I'm asking, tell me, have you ever taken a road that turned into something you didn't recognize? A fork you didn't mean to take and couldn't quite figure how you'd got on. Leave it in the comments. I read them. That's how these stories find me in the first place. Now, let's go back to it. The house was low, not tall enough for a man of Ston Rundle's height to stand up in without ducking, at least not near the door. Which meant, and Muner did not think this at the time, but Coldaron did, later, that a man of Rundle's height, standing at his own door, would already be crouching, would already be lower to the ground than a stranger arriving. It had a slate roof. Muner recognized the slate. It came from a seam on the north side of the ridge, 2 hollows over. Somebody had carried it. Somebody had carried a great deal of slate over rough country for a great many years. There was no smoke. The door was closed, not locked. There was no lock, just a wooden latch on a wooden peg. Muner called out first. He said, in a voice he tried to keep level, "Mr. Rundle, it's Sheriff Muner out of the county seat. I'm here about a Louisville man. I'd like to speak with you." Nobody answered. He called again. Nothing. He looked at Coldaron. Coldaron was pale. Muner had known him from the day he was born, more or less. Had known his father and his father's father, and he had never seen Coldaron pale. Muner said, "Stay outside. Watch the tree line." Coldaron nodded. Muner lifted the latch. He pushed the door open. The inside of the house was cleaner than he expected. That was the first thing. Not clean the way a woman's house is clean. Clean the way a barn is clean, when the man who owns it takes pride in it. Swept dirt floor, a stove made from a barrel vented through the roof, a cot along one wall, a table, 2 chairs, which Muner noticed and did not know what to make of, because as far as any living person in the county knew, Ston Rundle had lived alone since his mother had died in 1902. On the table there was a book. Muner walked to it. He did not sit. He opened it. It was a ledger, the kind of ledger a country storekeeper would keep. Bound in leather, ruled in blue and red, with the columns labeled at the top of each page in a hand. That was awkward but careful, as if the writer had learned to write late in life. The columns were labeled name, Eve, date, Eve, road, and under as name, going back to a first entry dated 1893, were names. The first name was written in a hand different from the rest, older, shakier. It read Edmund Rundle, November 1893, county. Edmund, not Edmund. Muner did not know who Edmund Rundle was, but he could guess. Ston's father or Ston's grandfather. One of the two. The second name further down the page, in a hand that was already becoming the hand that filled the rest of the book, read A man not known. April 1896, Fork. The third, A woman not known. August 1898, Fork. The fourth, A peddler mule. September 1908, Fork. Muner's mouth was dry. He turned the page. There were 41 names in the book. 41. Not all of them were people whose names Rundle had known. Some were descriptions. A driver, a young man from the mill, a woman with a black horse, a man with a red coat, 2 men on foot together, June 1922. Some were named. Muner recognized the names the Bascom Whipkey, spelled Bascom Whipkey, which almost made Muner laugh in a bad way. Aozius Van, spelled correctly, which meant Rundle had gone through the man's pockets to find a paper with his name on it. The last name in the book, in an entry dated Monday of the previous week, in ink that was still fresh enough to have not entirely dried on the outer edge of the letter D-A-Z. Cleve, Louisville man, Fork. Muner stood very still with the book open. He did not hear the door. I mean that literally. He did not hear the door open. He heard at some point a sound behind him. A small, dry sound like a man's coat brushing the frame. And he turned, and Rundle was standing in the doorway. Rundle was tall. Muner knew he was tall. Everyone in the county who had ever seen him knew he was tall. But the doorway of the house was low, and Rundle had stooped to come through it, and he was still stooping in the doorway, and even stooped. He filled the doorway the way weather fills a doorway. His shoulders touched the jambs on both sides. He was not holding a rifle. That was what Muner noticed first. Rundle was not holding a rifle. Rundle was not holding an axe. Rundle was holding nothing at all in either hand. His hands were at his sides. They were, as I mentioned earlier, very large. He was looking at Muner. Not angry, not surprised, not afraid. He was looking at Muner the way a man looks at another man who has come into his kitchen without knocking. Muner said, "Me second." Rundle. Rundle nodded very slightly. Muner said, "I read your book." Rundle looked past him at the book on the table. He looked at it for a long moment, as if to confirm that yes, that was the book Muner had read. Then he looked at Muner again, and he spoke. His voice was quieter than Muner expected. Not soft, not gentle quiet. Precise. The voice of a man who had not used his voice very often for many years and had grown careful about wasting it. He said, "The county road goes on up over. The fork comes to me." Muner said, "Yes." Rundle said, "I did not put the fork there. It was there before I was born. It was there before my father was born. My grandfather cut the last mile of it, and my father widened it, and I have kept it up, but I did not put it there." Muner said, "I understand." Rundle said, "People come up it." Muner said, "Yes." Rundle said, "They come up it because they think it is the road. It is not the road. The road goes on up over. Anybody in the county can tell them the road goes on up over. If they take the fork, that is because nobody told them, or because they did not listen." Muner said, "The man in your book from Monday, Delford Cleve." Rundle waited. Muner said, "Mrs. Coras told him." Rundle nodded once very slowly. He said, "Then he did not listen." Muner did not raise his voice. He said, "Mr. Rundle, you are going to tell me what you did with him." Rundle did not answer immediately. He turned his head very slightly to the left, looked past Muner again, through him almost, at the wall behind him, where a shelf ran the length of the house at about shoulder height. Muner followed his gaze. The shelf was full of things. I want to be careful again. I am not going to describe everything on that shelf. I don't need to. You can imagine better than I can tell it what things would be on a shelf in the house of a man who had entered 40. One people into a ledger over the course of his lifetime. There were personal effects. A wedding band dark with tarnish. A pair of eyeglasses in a bent silver frame. A fountain pen. A small leather wallet, unopened. A Bible with a name written inside the front cover. Muner did not go check the name, but he could see from where he stood that it was a small Bible, the kind a preacher would carry in a coat pocket, and it was the kind of Bible Ozias Van had been known to carry. There was a Biltmore stick, a timber cruiser's Biltmore stick, leaning against the wall at the end of the shelf. Muner looked at it. He looked back at Rundle. Rundle said, without any change in his voice at all, "I keep what they leave. I do not take what they carry. I do not take what they wear. I only keep what they leave. That is the arrangement." Muner said, "The arrangement with who?" Rundle said, "With whoever comes up the fork." He said it as if it were obvious. He said it as if any grown man ought to understand. Then he said, and this is the part that Muner wrote down that night in his own hand on a piece of paper he kept for the rest of his life in the inside pocket of his coat. He said, "I do not come down. That is the other side of the arrangement. I do not come down out of Sorewood Bench. Not to your county seat. Not to your church. Not to your store. Not for the mail. Not for anything. My mother is buried down there. I did not come down for her funeral. I did not come down for her stone. I have not come down since I was 19 years old. I did not come down for the Louisville man. He came up. That is how it works. I do not go to them. They come to me, And if you take me down, Sheriff, and put me in your jail, then the arrangement is broken. And if the arrangement is broken—" He paused. He looked at Muner very carefully. He said, "Then somebody else will keep it, and you will not know who, and you will not know where, and the fork will still be there, and the road will still go on up over, and nobody will tell them." Muner did not answer. Rundle said, "I have not touched a Christian man in my life, Sheriff. Not with my hand. I only kept the book. Whatever else you found in that ledger, or in what I keep, is between them and the fork, not between them and me." Muner stood very still. The book was still open on the table beside him. The Biltmore stick was still leaning against the wall. Outside, very faintly, he could hear Coldarn's boots shifting in the grass. Here is what happened next. I want you to understand, and I have thought about this for the length of time it has taken me to prepare this account, which is a good long while. I want you to understand that what happened next was not what should have happened. What should have happened is that Sheriff Alger Muner should have arrested Rundle. He should have brought him down the fork at gunpoint. He should have put him in a wagon and taken him to the county seat. He should have opened a case. He should have deputized men and gone back up the fork with shovels. He should have found what 41 names in a book meant in the soil of that bench, or in the woods above it, or in the spring at the far end of the meadow. He should have written a report. He should have wired the Louisville Lumber Company. He should have wired the peddler's widow, if she was still living. He should have preached the truth of it from the courthouse steps if he had to. That is what should have happened. What did happen is this: Muner took the book. He took the Biltmore stick. He took the wedding band and the fountain pen and the small pocket Bible with Ozias Van's name in it. And he put them in a canvas sack he had brought up for evidence. He did not touch Rundle. He walked to the door. He looked at Rundle. And Rundle stepped aside from the door, and Muner walked out. He walked past Coldarn without looking at him. Coldarn fell in behind. They walked back down the fork in silence. It took them an hour and 40 minutes. Muner said nothing the entire way. At the mouth of the fork, they untied the mare from the rail somebody had built there. Coldarn said, in a voice that was barely a voice at all, "Sheriff, what are you going to do?" Muner said, "Nothing." Coldarn said, "Sheriff." Muner said, "I mean it, nothing. And you are going to do nothing either. And if I ever hear you tell a living soul what you saw in that house on that bench, I am going to know that you told, and I am going to run you out of this county. Rafe Coldarn, do you hear me?" Coldarn looked at him. Coldarn was pale still. Coldarn had been pale for 2 hours. Coldarn was going to be pale for the rest of his life. Coldarn said, "Yes, sir." Muner said, "Delford Cleve went into the ridge on Monday. He did not come out. That is what you write. That is what I write. That is what the record says. Lost in the ridge. Presumed lost. There is a widow in Louisville, Rafe, and she is going to get an envelope from the county in the next 2 weeks. It is going to say her husband was lost on a survey. That is what she is going to get. That is all she is going to get, because if she gets any more than that, then Rundle comes down out of Sorewood Bench. And if Rundle comes down—" Muner stopped. He did not finish the sentence. Coldarn did not ask him to. They rode back down past Osro Whipkey's farm at dusk. Osro was on his porch. Osro raised a hand. Muner raised one back. Nobody said anything. That is the story of the Louisville man. That is what happened, as far as I have been able to reconstruct it, in the second week of October 1927. The rest of it I can tell you more quickly. Muner signed off on the file the following month. The words on the sheet, in his own hand, are still in the county archive. I have not seen them myself, but a man I trust has. And he read them to me over a bad telephone connection 3 winters ago. And I wrote them down word for word. And they say only this is Cleve, timber cruiser of Louisville, Kentucky, presumed lost in the ridge. Survey abandoned. Case closed. He wrote a letter to the widow. He wired the lumber company. He put the ledger and the Biltmore stick and the wedding band and the fountain pen and the small pocket Bible in a strong box, in a closet, in his own house. He did not put them in the courthouse. He did not enter them into evidence. He kept them. Rafe Coldiron stayed on as a deputy for 4 more years. Then he moved out of the county. He moved his family to Tennessee, then to Missouri, then further west. He never spoke of the Gaunt Fork to anyone, as far as I have been able to find out. He died in 1968 in a hospital in Kansas City of an ordinary illness. His grandchildren know nothing. Ston Rundle stayed up on Sorewood Bench. He came down once a year, as he had always done, to the store at the head of the county road. He wrote what he needed on a slip of paper. He paid in coin. He said nothing. 2 more people took the fork. The first was a man named Wister Perdue. In the spring of 1931, he was a whiskey runner from Tennessee. He had a stolen truck and a poorly drawn map. He was reported missing by his own brother in June of that year. Muner rode up alone, without a deputy this time. He came back down with the truck, which he drove to the county impound. He did not go up the fork. He never told anyone what, if anything, he had discussed with Rundle. Perdue's file, still in the county archive, says, presumed lost in the ridge. Vehicle recovered, case closed. The second was a woman named Neola Trilby, in the autumn of 1937. She was 38 years old, unmarried, and she was traveling from Ohio to see a sister in Tennessee. She had a Ford Roadster and a road atlas that showed the county road, but not the fork. She stopped at Verley Corras's boarding house. Mrs. Corras was still alive then, still ran the boarding house, was in her 70s. Mrs. Corras told her explicitly, plainly twice, do not take the fork. Miss Trilby thanked her. She was a courteous woman, according to Mrs. Corras. In the morning, she drove out. She was seen by a farmer at the last farm. Ozro Whipke was dead by then. The farm belonged to his nephew, and the nephew watched her stop at the fork. Look at her atlas, look at the fork, look at the atlas again, and take the fork. Muner did not go up. Muner was 63 years old and tired. And he sent Rafe Coldiron's replacement, a deputy named Manfred Kittredge, up to the mouth of the fork to fetch the roadster. Kittredge fetched the roadster. He did not go up the fork. He was told not to, and he did not. Neola Trilby was signed off, presumed lost in the ridge. Vehicle recovered. Case closed. That was the pattern. That was the arrangement. Muner retired in the spring of 1939. He died in the spring of 1941 in his own bed of a stroke at the age of 67. His widow, her name was Amaryllis Muner, and she outlived him by 31 years, found the strong box in the closet 3 days after the funeral. She looked at it once. She wrote a note. The note said, do not open until I am also gone. She locked it back up. She left it to her only son. He was 24 when his father died, 32 when his mother died, and when he opened the strongbox in the spring of 1972 and read the ledger, he did what his father should have done in 1927. He took it to the state police. By then, Ston Rundle had been dead for 11 years. Rundle died in the winter of 1961. I know this because his death is on record in the county. For the only time in his adult life, he came down, or rather, he was brought down. A hunter found him. The hunter was a man in his 40s from up around Louisville himself, who had been given permission to hunt the ridge by the lumber company that still owned the cutting rights above Sorewood Bench. He was not looking for the fork. He was following a wounded deer that had crossed the county road, and gone down toward the bench. And he came out of the woods behind the small, mean house at the back of the meadow, and he found the door of it open. And he called out, and no one answered, and he went in. Ston Rundle was on the cot. He had been dead for perhaps 3 days. It had been cold, and he was well preserved, and he was fully dressed, and his hands were folded on his chest. He had died in his sleep. He was 86 years old. The hunter walked out of the meadow, down the fork, and did not stop walking until he reached the county road. And then he flagged down the first vehicle he saw. And the vehicle carried him back to the town at the head of the county road. And he told the sheriff, a new sheriff, not Muner's successor, but the one after that, a man named Delford Radliff, no relation to any of the previous names in this story, what he had found. Radliff went up the fork. He was the first sheriff in the county's history to go up it in an official capacity and come back down with a report that named the man at the top. He brought Rundle down. He put him in the county morgue. He arranged at the county's expense for a Baptist burial in the churchyard down the road, next to Rundle's mother. He did not look at the shelf. I know this because he wrote a report, and the report is short, and the report describes the house, floor, cot, stove, table, chairs, and does not describe the shelf. I do not know if Radliff missed it, or if Radliff saw it and chose not to describe it. I have my own opinion, and I will not tell it to you, because I do not want you to think of Delford Radliff, a man who by every account was a good sheriff and a church-going man and a father of 4 grown sons and daughters. The way I have sometimes thought of Muner. The house is not there anymore. The lumber company harvested that ridge in the summer of 1966. They took the meadow. They took the apple trees. They took the spring. They graded the bench flat. There is now a logging road that runs across the top of it, which is not the same road as the fork, which comes in from a different direction. There is nothing at Sorewood Bench today that a visitor would notice. The fork is still there. The fork is still there. I want you to hear that twice. The fork is not on the state road maps. It is not on the county road maps. It is not on any GPS or satellite map I have been able to check. But it is there. If you drive up the county road that runs between the head of the Cumberland and the West Virginia line. And I am not going to tell you which one. And I am not going to tell you where. You will pass a place 3 miles above the last farm, where the road bends left along the shoulder of a ridge. If you look sharp on your left side in the bend, you will see a stand of poplar. Old poplar, older than they should be for that country. And behind the poplar, if you stop your car and get out and walk over to it, you will see a road. It is passable on foot. I'm not going to tell you not to take it. I'm not Verley Korass. I am not Osro Whipke on his porch. I am not Muner, 63 years old and tired, sending a deputy up to fetch a roadster. I am a man telling you a story on the internet at whatever hour of whatever night you happen to be listening. And if you take that fork after hearing this, that is on you. But I will tell you this: Rundle is buried in a Baptist churchyard down the road. His stone is small and gray, and does not say anything except his name and the years of his birth and death. There is nobody left alive who visits it. His mother's stone next to his has been cracked by frost and never replaced. The ledger is in a box in a state police archive in Frankfort. There are 41 names in it. 31 of them have never been matched to any missing persons report. This is because most of them are not names. They are descriptions. The Biltmore stick, the wedding band, the fountain pen, and the small pocket Bible are in the same box. The wedding band has been matched. It belonged to a man named Coleman Ashby of Ohio, who disappeared while traveling to a coal purchasing meeting in 1924. His widow lived until 1959. She was never told. The fountain pen has not been matched. The Bible has been matched. Osius Van, his name is inside the cover. His congregation dissolved when he did not come back. His widow remarried a man in Alabama. Nobody in his family, that anyone has been able to reach, was ever told what became of him. I have thought a great deal about the arrangement. I have thought about what Rundle told Muner in the door of the house. I have thought about the phrase, "Somebody else will keep it, and you will not know who, and you will not know where." I do not know if that was true. I do not know if Rundle was the only man in that ridge in 1893 or in 1927 or in 1961 who kept a book. I do not know how his grandfather learned the arrangement. I do not know who taught his grandfather. I do not know what the arrangement is with. I know only this: the Gaunt Fork has been there since before any road on any state map was there. And it goes to a bench. And on that bench once there was a small, mean house, and in that house there was a shelf. And on that shelf there were things people had left behind them without meaning to. And when Rundle died, the house was already old. And when the lumber company graded the bench flat, the fork was already there. And when the movie came out decades later, and the people who wrote it said they had heard once a story from a man in a bar in Louisville about a road in the mountains that people did not come back from. Well, you have to understand. A movie takes what it can carry. A movie needs a monster. A movie needs a face. The real thing was a man. A tall, thin man in a brown wool coat, who did not come down out of Sorewood bench for 67 years, and who kept a book, and who told the sheriff in a quiet voice in the door of his own house that he had not touched a Christian man in his life. That is worse than the movie, because the man did not have to do anything for people to keep coming up the fork. The fork did the work, and the fork is still there, and if you have ever been on a road on a night, and you looked at your map and you looked at the road going up, and you looked at the fork breaking off to the left, and you took the fork, I want you to leave it in the comments. Not the horror story you're expecting, not the punchline, just the road, where it was, what time of year, whether you turned back or drove through, and what it looked like when the pavement went to gravel and the gravel went to dirt. I read them. That is how these stories find me. If you have made it this far into the dark with me, and you are the kind of listener I think you are, then let me remind you one last time what the mountain keeps: 10 cases, 10 hours, 62 years of records nobody wanted to finish, 5 states. Every one of them signed off with the wrong word. The link is in the description below. It is pinned at the top of the comments. If you take one thing from this account, take that, because there are 9 more. And every one of them is a road somebody took the wrong way up. Sleep well tonight if you can. Until the next one.